Jordan. I am so excited to talk to you today. How are you doing?
I'm great, Erica. It's really great to be able to catch up with you like this.
I know. So, for you guys that are listening, I have known Jordan's work for quite some time, and I'm trying to think how we were originally introduced. Was it through Amy Sackstetter or Artist Mother Network or something?
Um, I am not sure, but I do think that it was because we saw each other's work on Instagram first. And then for me, I'm just always keyed in when someone is from Ohio. I'm like, let me find out more about this person who's also in the state that I happen to be in. So
I
that's,
love it.
that's what I remember.
Yeah. Oh, Instagram. I mean, it really
Yeah.
does connect so many makers. And
Mhm, mhm,
yeah, finding out you were from Ohio as well was fascinating. And I think another thing that we really connected on, which I can't wait to dive into, is a bit of your story,
mhm,
which is being from the Midwest,
mhm,
leaving the Midwest to go to the coast and living there for quite a long time.
mhm,
And then that decision to leave at some point.
mhm.
So let's go ahead and just dive into it because I really loved hearing this story from you. Yeah, take us back to that time of how you were starting to get into the arts and then the decisions that kind of dictated for you and led you to make.
Sure. Uh, So as you said, I grew up in the Midwest and in Ohio for most of my youth and left when I was 18 to go to undergrad, but didn't go very far. I ended up in Indiana for 4 years. But when I finished that undergrad, I so I was an art major and
Did you go
mostly
to Indiana
painting.
University?
Oh no, I went to Goshen College, which is a
Goshen.
small liberal arts school,
Mm-hmm.
Mennonite. And I
Mm-hmm.
grew up Mennonite, but didn't quite fit my life as an adult. But I went to Goshen and found community there of people who were kind of like-minded. And that was kind of more important to me at the time, maybe than, or looking back, that was a benefit for me at the time. I thought that I was going to go to art school. Like I had done an early summer program at the Art Institute of Chicago and really felt like, oh my God, I love this. I want to be in a city. I want to be with other artists. I thought I'd go to Goshen for a year and then ended up staying because I found a good community of people there. So I think it was actually very important for me to stay. Plus, I got a heavy dose of women's studies, which is what it was called at the time. And that
Mm-hmm.
was really important to me to kind of get that schooling there.
Mm-hmm.
But then I graduated and I didn't know what I was going to do, but I had this kind of naive trust that I would be able to figure it out. So I moved to Arizona for 6 months following a friend who was going to go to school there to be a doctor. And I worked at a used bookstore, which actually, if you know, like my earlier work makes a lot of sense because I painted a lot of stacks of books, but I was a book buyer there, which was an amazing experience to work at the counter and like people bring in these boxes of books and sorting through them and other people there would look out for you. And somebody found this 70s Sears catalog for me. And then I made work from that Sears catalog for like a full 2 years. Like everything I did was from that Sears catalog. This was a long time
That's
ago.
But that's incredible, this idea of also being able to see into people's lives, when they're
Yeah.
bringing all their books, like it's like a
Yeah.
portal into who they
Yes.
have been. Huh.
Yes. And that's what my book paintings were kind of about for a while too. So it's funny to look back on it that way. But I was only there 6 months and then I moved to California to work at an artist residency program in Woodside, California, which is between Half Moon Bay on the coast and Redwood City inland and about an hour south of San Francisco. But what an amazing time because I was young, like just a year out of undergrad. And I got to witness this artist community where there were people coming in internationally, artists who were visual artists, writers, choreographers, musicians. And they were people who felt a bit like peers, but they were also kind of like mentors because they were established enough that they were getting residencies like this. And I just learned so much from that. That was only, I think I was there 9 or 10 months or something like that. But I had a studio, I had a place to live. I had health insurance. It was in the mountains of California. It was kind of a dream. And
That's
then
incredible to
it was
think
it was really
about.
amazing. And whenever I am like talking to a young artist who's about to graduate and they don't know what to do, if they have the kind of right temperament for moving to a place that could be a rural place, working at an artist residency is just such a fantastic experience. I loved it. It
Yeah.
really, yeah.
I love that you're bringing this up too, because a lot of younger artists that I talk to, I say that the most free I personally felt in my own artwork was that time between undergrad and graduate school. You know what
Mhm.
I mean? Where
Mhm.
you had skills, you had some background, but you weren't quite yet initiated into the quote unquote art world or
Yeah,
that whole thing. So you were
yeah,
just kind of making, and it sounds like
right.
that was a similar thing, like for
Yeah,
your work and just for you as a person.
yeah, yeah. And it was definitely a time of experimentation in the studio for me. Sometimes leaving a degree program, then you leave and it feels like, oh, I gotta, what do I even do? I'm sick of what I just did. And like all the talking I had to do about that work, let me make something new. And so that really happened for me there. I was making sculptures and drawings and collages and not painting as much as I was when I finished undergrad. But one of the big benefits about that time as well was I met so many people, including a lot of people who were in New York City. And so when I kind of finished the season there, I could have stayed on, but I thought, I'm just going to move to New York City. And I had never been there. And I just rented a car and I drove in with all my stuff. And this is like pre-smartphone. So I probably printed out MapQuest directions to drive across Manhattan into Brooklyn to stay with a friend in Greenpoint till I found an apartment. And that was how I landed in New York City, just cold,
That is
but
really
with people I
ballsy. I
knew.
love it.
Yeah.
But still, even just packing your car and just jumping in, I think
Mhm.
you were talking about temperament previously for artists
Mhm.
to, and I think that's true. There takes a certain temperament to be able to kind of jump in with both feet, like, all right, here we go.
There's so much risk. There's really a lot of risk in like pursuing a life in the arts. But it's
It really
all,
is.
you know, within this realm of creative risk and things that you're going to do with your work, but also like can you be flexible? Can you find ways to, make money and make a life for yourself? And can you grow and bend and shift in ways that feel new and exciting and maybe uncomfortable, but there's a lot of risk with that. There's no path
Yeah,
that's laid out
there's
for
no
any of
path.
us.
There,
And that's exciting and
exactly.
terrifying.
Yeah, and I love what you said about flexibility, because I think that's like the biggest key for people who want to have a life as an artist is there isn't a set way. There's not A, B, C. We like to think that there is, but there's really not. It's more of, okay, what is going to work for your situation
Right,
and your temperament and who you are.
right.
Um, so I love that you showed up in Greenpoint and then you ended up going to school in New York, correct?
I did, yeah. I did my graduate work at Brooklyn College, which was a good school for me. It was a good fit. It's kind of scrappy, that program. It's a
Mhm.
little DIY. You got to make things happen for yourself there, or at least when I was there, which was 2006 through 2008. But I think it was the right program for me for that reason,
Mhm.
because I like to
Mhm.
kind of be self-led,
And
self-directed.
who was the main faculty member there at the time? Was there
Um,
like,
there were kind of three that shared that. Archie Rand was
mhm.
there, Patricia Cronin, and William T. Williams.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Because I remember hearing a bit about Brooklyn College faculty back in the day, and it was a superb painting
Oh,
school.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. And that
such a,
legacy hangs
yeah.
on.
Y- Oh yeah, yeah. So you go to Brooklyn College, and then
Mhm.
you ended up being in New York for quite some time making work, correct?
Well, I stayed until 2010. So I was there, God, 2002 to 2010. So
Yeah.
over an 8-year span. Yeah. I dipped into Boston for like a 2 years in the middle of that.
Oh,
I was like, I'm out.
Boston, yes. You have to. I mean, it's like so close, like such
Yeah.
a large historical city and so close. So take us back to that time.
Yeah.
You're in New York, you're doing your
Mhm.
thing, you're
Mhm.
painting. Talk about the decision, like what your work looked like, and then the decision that you made that we have talked about personally about deciding that you needed to make a move for
Oh,
yourself.
sure. Yeah, yeah. Um, so when I first landed in New York, driving in and trying to make it up, I really did not have a studio practice for those first maybe 2 years. I had a little desk and I would make some drawings and stuff. Like I was always doing creative things, but I didn't have a studio, and I wasn't like making work to be a professional artist. But what I was doing was getting an education in the museums and in the galleries and just immersing myself in this world of culture that I didn't have access to growing up in Northwest Ohio, or in undergrad in Indiana, or even in Arizona or rural California. I had spent all these formative years immersed in the arts, but without being able to go to these institutions regularly. I could visit, but it wasn't quite the same as being in New York, where it was like, it's Saturday, I'm going to the Met, like just very casual about it. So I just thought about that as an educational time for me. And then what happened? Oh, I went to Chautauqua and got to do studio work in the summer there, and then kind of went back and did jobs during the year. And then the next summer, or maybe it was more towards the fall, I got a residency at Vermont Studio Center for 2 months, and I made all the work to apply to grad school there because I knew I needed to get back into the studio. So it was like, okay, I haven't figured out how to have a studio practice alongside my day-to-day life. So let me just go immerse myself in a studio and do only that and make the work so that I can go to graduate school and make that more sustainable for myself. So that's what I did. And I spent 2 months at Vermont Studio Center, and then went to Brooklyn College the following fall. Okay, what else? The change that happened. That's what you asked about.
Yeah, so you were you were in New York. Well, first, I also want to say I like that you're sharing this, because I think, again, a topic that we keep touching on is this idea of a life in the arts, and that people also think that it might be linear, and it's not exactly always linear. And there can be these moments and pockets and seasons, as I like to call them, where you're in your studio making, and then I'm in the museums, or I'm doing this other thing, or I have to make money that's going to sustain me for so many months. Right. And I think there's like this idea out there that if you're not in the studio every day for like 6 hours or 10 hours, like you're not an artist, right? Yeah, I know. And I just really want to dispel that, because I think that is really damaging to artists, and I think actually more women artists than anybody else. So I like how you're talking about this. So yeah, you end up going to BC, and then you're immersed and you're making, and you have this career. And I'm fascinated by when you made the decision to leave New York, because you were so entrenched. I mean, you were like, this was your life.
Yeah. But okay, so I talked about like leaving to go do Chautauqua and Vermont Studio Center. And I also, after graduate school, would leave in the summer to go teach at Interlochen Center for the Arts up in Northern Michigan. Cool. I love that place. Like that place is really the origin of my artistic path was there, because I was a camper there in high school, and I was a choir major, but I took one little painting class, and I was like, I'm done with choir, send me up for art. But I would go back there and teach there in the summers. And so I really felt torn between city life and being able to kind of feel the freedom of a natural environment, which I would get in the summers at Interlochen. But, that's not really a path that fit me somehow, to like move back and forth every year, like pick up, go somewhere, come back. And it's also hard to feel a sense of continuity, I guess, for me at that time. So I felt okay about leaving the city, but really it's life changes too. Like my life is bigger than just my studio practice. And my partner got a job in Virginia teaching. And I was like, I'm going to go. We were long distance. And so I was like, I'm coming. And it was great for that reason, but it was terrible for me to try to find a job. I hated that time of being so specific with my job skills. And I've always had some kind of job, and it's almost always been art related. So I'm like I can't just go anywhere and show up and get a job. And there were no jobs for me in this tiny town in Virginia. So we left after that first year and we moved to Lincoln, Nebraska. And that surprisingly was one of the most formative, positive art life experiences for me, was moving to Lincoln, Nebraska. And that was the place that really gave me a sense of artistic communities thriving outside of major cities and doing it without a commercial gallery scene somehow, you know, and this kind of, that's where I really got interested in artist run spaces and artists kind of making things up for themselves and building things themselves. And it was very powerful for me that time in Lincoln. And I never knew it would be. And you know what? If I maybe had moved straight from New York City to Lincoln, I might have been more down on it. But because I had that tough year in Virginia, I was like, Lincoln is awesome.
Isn't it funny how those tough moments really can put a new lens in front of us for something else? Like, actually, this is pretty awesome, you know, like that's really, really funny and amazing. So there was this thriving scene, it sounds like, and I love this thread that you're weaving through your life, which is also community. You know, community is so important to you, and you're able to find it there and see artists who were creating lives again with that flexibility, it sounds like.
Self-directed. And I think that that's probably why I was most interested in, you know, kind of pursuing this for my life, is that it can be self-directed and, you know, you can make things up for yourself. It's encouraged, it's necessary. So that, I think that fit me really well.
So take us into now. Tell us a little bit about what you're working on and what your life looks like now.
So I have time between studio and teaching part-time and then raising my kids. And that's really where my world is right now, between those three places. And it changes based on whatever is going on in family life, really, and then how I can fit the other things around too. But it's kind of always been essential for me to have a tether to the outside world, and that's what teaching is for me. Like if I was just doing studio and raising kids, that would be a little too insular for me. So having that tether to having a schedule that I show up and I get to interact with people and learn from students too, that's really important to me. So I teach drawing and kind of all ages too, as well as university teaching. And then I have my studio practice, which I dive into whenever I can. I don't have a set schedule. I just kind of, or the schedule will shift, you know, like there will be times when this is kind of my normal studio schedule. And then, you know, something will kind of move into that space and I'll roll with it and flow with it. That's the flexibility, I think.
Yeah. I think our kids are the same age almost.
They're pretty close.
Pretty close. And I feel like one of the things that I was learning and that I feel like you're kind of touching upon yourself is that with each age, there's a different set of, I don't know, responsibilities for that child and where they are. And now that our older two are in like school, I feel like there can be a little bit more of a schedule, whereas before when they're young, there's no schedule. Like, and it's always shifting depending on where they are developmentally, you know. But if there's any like artist moms listening who are in that earlier stage, because I feel like I'm seeing a lot on Instagram of women artists who are having like their first child and stuff, and it's so great to see because I don't feel like we saw that 10 years ago. Definitely didn't, you know. But yeah, and that beginning part, it's like pockets of time, you know, and not a set schedule. And then as they like get older, there's more of a schedule and it gets like a little bit easier. I don't know if easier is the word, but I don't know. Do you feel like you've had that experience or?
Maybe, but it always shifts because when they're young, I made most of my work during their nap time. I made
me too.
Serious amounts of work in that 2-hour block or whatever. And then when naps stopped, it was like, oh my God, I don't get my afternoons anymore. And then I have to shift with that. So it's just this kind of process of changing. So I don't yet know, like, I don't want to speak too soon and say what's easier. But yeah, now that all three of them are in some form of school, that has given me this block of time in the mornings. So I'm either teaching 3 mornings a week, and then I have 2 mornings. What do I do during that time? So right now, because we're just coming off summer and kind of getting back into fall schedule, I'm like figuring out what that looks like. Yeah.
So I want to hear about what you're working on in your studio right now.
Oh yeah,
I love looking over your corner. I know. I love, but these are all the things that make up the ability to be in the studio.
That's
you know
right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And feed the work too.
Yeah.
So I'm looking over your corner and I'm loving this painting that I'm seeing here with like the heart and then the other heart, the heart one. Yeah. So tell us what you're working on and kind of where your interests lie right now.
Well, lately I've been working on a body of work that is really in the realm of self-portraiture through the objects that I surround myself with, but also inherited objects, and kind of tracing this matrilineal line back through ways that we kind of place meaning in objects, and how stories get embedded in objects, and how that's so idiosyncratic and personal and impossible to translate to other people. So for me, it's kind of like riding this line between the importance of an object as a kind of memory holder and the weight of all of the physical things that are kind of passed down. So a lot of it is coming from my great-grandmother, through my mother, my grandparents, and then my mother, down to me. And then I have kids too. So it's like, well, we can't get rid of that because that was Grandma Norma's thing. And so I have things that are very special to me from her, but then there's other things that we will never get rid of this, because like we as a family, because it belonged to kind of our matriarch in our family. So for me, it's kind of this line between almost the anxiety of how much stuff is there and how it does have meaning, but that might not always be accessible, but somehow it's still important. So that's kind of the world that I'm inhabiting right now. These are maybe the most personal paintings that I've ever made. Like the one that you were looking at, it's called 1979, and that's the year I was born. And then there's ultrasound pictures from my children. There's that heart is a little love note from my partner. There's little framed pictures on the wall that are a little more like ghost-like images, but those are of grandparents and my mom and me as a kid. And so this is like the view that I was looking at my desk in Lincoln, Nebraska. So I just painted that view of like it's almost like an altar, it's the things that I'm surrounding myself with and that I have in my view that are important to me for whatever reason. And when you see an ultrasound, you can think, oh yeah, you understand why that might be important to somebody. But then there's other objects there that don't carry that same currency, I guess, of like immediate understanding of why that might be important, but it's more buried under the surface of what those memories are and why someone would hold on to this little bit of plastic, which is really just junk.
Oh my gosh. Well, I love this idea of, again, time, like looking back in time, looking at the women that have formed your family, that you're connected with, who may or may not still be here with us, and like there's that time lapse that is occurring that forms you. And I was interested in this idea of like an altar, because it does feel very altar like, looking at them with these objects and even like the stacking and everything. As you're going into these pieces, I'm curious, do you do like preparatory sketches? Are you just kind of diving in? How do you kind of begin one of these paintings? Because they're larger pieces back there too, it looks like.
Yeah, so that one that we're talking about is 40 by 30. I start by taking pictures. Like I'll see something around me and feel like I can frame that in a way that would make sense for a painting. So I have an archive of images as source images, and then I print them out, but I try to Like, I don't need a high quality print or a high quality photo. Like, in a lot of ways, it's better when it's a not great printout and there's blurry parts or shadowy parts where I have to work a little bit to either make it up or make up the painterly language that fills that place. Because probably on a screen, there's this sense that they're very representational, and they are, but there's always places in the paintings where there is just paint. There's just a paint move. It is not a descriptive move, but it is something that is existing purely because it's a painting. So I work from those printouts, and then that's it. I do kind of start with drawing on the surface itself. Like, I'll just use some very thin cadmium red to make a contour drawing, kind of place things there, but I don't really do sketches or collages or anything like that. My drawing practice is kind of parallel to my painting practice, and they inform each other, but I'm not doing the drawing in service of the painting.
Something else I've always loved about your paintings, looking at them, is the space. Like, you work in a relatively shallow space, as do I. I think that's why I'm always looking at it. Like, I love those shallow spaces. So could you talk a little bit about that? Like the decision to be working in that type of space, or maybe how it feeds the work or anything surrounding that.
I mean, a shallow space like that feels like an intimate space to me. And before this series of paintings that I'm working on now, I did a lot of those open drawer paintings, and it was this view. So then the drawer was like flipped up onto the wall. But there's this very narrow space that's existing within the drawer, and then this world that is happening in this enclosed space. And before that, with the book paintings, those were always kind of in a shallow space too, because of the lighting choices that I would make. And there would be like this shadow world existing beyond the stack of books. And the books really started because I would paint them in these kind of upright stacks, often, not always, but often, as a stand-in for a person and a stand-in for portraiture. And so I think a lot of that stems from this idea of like a portrait where there's a figure and then some kind of backdrop. Like, that is a very shallow space too. And so I've stayed in that world of working with, a space of maybe like 2 feet. And that's even a lot for some of my paintings. Most of them, the space is maybe 1 foot or less that we're working in.
I love that. I love the idea of that personal space. Like, you feel like you're in it instead of just being in this expanse, And the other thing I've always loved about your paintings, I'm looking at the one on the other side behind you that you're working on. Yep, that one. And you were mentioning it with your book paintings, which is, I love seeing this, where you're talking, you flip everything up against the picture plane. So instead of looking at it where it's going to be like going back into like this space, it's like rather almost feels like it's going to tumble over onto the viewer, which I think it activates the viewer, for me anyway. When I'm looking at it, I feel like I'm more part of it. Can you talk a little bit about that decision to flip stuff up towards the viewer in the picture plane?
Yeah. I mean, for me, that's kind of where the anxiety lives, that something could tumble, things could fall. It's not as much maybe with these more kind of altar paintings, but especially with those drawer paintings, where it's all this jumble that's enclosed within this formal rectangle of both the drawer and then the formal rectangle of the panel that it's on. But within that is all this chaos, some pockets of organization, but mostly chaos. And then there's this feeling that, everything could fall apart, everything could fall away. And so I think that that's kind of why I enjoy that conceptually, but I don't know what it is formally about why I like that so much. I think it's because it takes it out of this idea of like having the drawer below you. I don't know, it like puts you face to face with it a little bit more. Your puddles do that too, though, looking at you.
Totally love to I think it's like, Yeah. And that's why because I think if people looked at our paintings, they would think that we're very different painters, but really, I don't think we are.
Mhm.
I think a lot of our formal concerns are very similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even just like the idea of like having something that describes and it's a mark, but it's also, something else.
Yeah.
And I'm always trying to figure out why I love to do this because I look back at my history of paintings. I'm like, oh wow, I've been doing this a long time. I just
Yeah.
wasn't as conscious when I was 22,
Right.
that I was doing it. And I think it's also because it becomes more of like an abstract element, like
Mhm.
when you flip your books up or even like looking at that piece, it becomes more of like the composition and the grid that occurs.
Yeah.
So it's like playing on those formal elements. And that's how I feel when I flip my puddles up, is it becomes more
Mhm.
of an abstract shape rather
Mhm.
than pushing it back into a realistic quote
Right.
unquote space,
Right.
so
Right.
yeah,
I
I don't
just
know.
love writing that line between sort of description to get towards a realistic space, and then also breaking with that too, and really letting a painting be a painting and letting the painting do things that only paintings can do. That is, I love writing that line. Like, I just want to ride that line.
Right? It's like fascinating. And that's where like the fun and
Yes.
excitement can be, right? Where it's
Yes.
like, yes, it is, I am describing a book or a puddle or whatever it is,
Right.
but it's still a painting. And
Right.
so here is how I'm going to really kind of be pushing that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that about your book paintings, and this painting over here,
Yeah.
and what you're
Yeah.
creating is how it functions. Um, so now I wanted to ask you, because you've had so many great experiences in your career, and you've done so much in terms of not only exhibiting and showing, but creating opportunities for other artists
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
curating people into exhibitions. Is there any advice that you've learned along the way, or maybe that somebody has given you, that you would like to share with artists who are listening?
Oh, well, I've thought about this question a lot, because this is a question that I always enjoy hearing responses to when you ask people on the podcast. And I was thinking back through my history. Was there ever a time that somebody gave me advice that, like, I really felt and I've taken with me and I remember? So much about like studio visits and education is about kind of sharing advice back and forth, which I guess then part of it is being able to have a filter for all the advice that people kind of can bring in over time, and being able to feel your internal compass and know when somebody's advice doesn't fit you. So the advice that I was thinking about for this question, um, one came from an artist, Nancy Friedemann Sanchez, who was someone I met in Lincoln, but she had just moved there from New York. And she is a mother. And when I was pregnant with my first, she's so kind and so generous in so many ways to other artists too. And she has an artist run space with her partner. So she's an example. But she also just told me, like, you might just make smaller work that first year. I needed to be able to make work at my kitchen table, and that's okay. And, that's the kind of advice that people might say all along the way to especially artists who are about to become parents. But that felt like maybe permission or something, like it's okay to step back, that your life can be well-rounded and it may not always look the same, that it's not going to look the same as it did before baby. And she's saying this to me as she has an amazing, huge studio space, and she's making these enormous, intricate drawings. She's like, yeah, at that time I just worked on my table. And I was like, okay, so there I can see what the future could hold, which is, anything. But there is a time when it will be smaller. So there was that advice that really stayed with me. But there was also so much advice I didn't take or actively rebelled against, like, I don't know, staying in a major metropolitan area to be an artist. That didn't fit me, so I left. But that was maybe not advice that somebody said directly to me, but definitely advice that I received, or like a kind of judgment that I felt there are so many hierarchies in the art world, and I don't want to climb up every one of them, you know, and I feel like there was this kind of feeling of like, if you are successful, you got to do this, and then you got to step up here, and then you got to move up this way. And my life has just moved in ways that are different. And I still feel like here I am at midlife, and I've been able to have a career in the arts since my 20s. And, you know, it fits me the way it fits me. And not everybody's idea of what is the important hierarchy is going to be important to me. So I feel like I've always been a bit rebellious. And so part of the advice is learning what not to take.
Yes, Jordan, that is so well put. Like you nailed that, because it's true. Everybody has an opinion.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And they may be right for them. And
yeah,
it's not right for you.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
It has worked for them, or their opinion, or whatever, or their experience. But yeah, it may not work in your life or that season of your life.
Yeah.
And I love how you put the hierarchies in the art world, because there are so many, so many.
Yeah.
And you have to select maybe which ones you're involved with, or rejecting all of them, or whatever it is that works for you.
Right.
But I feel you on the rebelliousness. I was the same way.
Like, don't tell me what to do.
Yeah, it's also, well, what if I try this? Like, why not? Why can't I try this? Right. And yes. Oh, thank you, Jordan. That was really wonderful. I love you giving this shout out to Nancy Friedman Sanchez. I wrote down their name. Is there any other artists that you'd like to give a shout out to right now?
Yeah. Okay. So this is a hard one too, because there's so many people that have been important to me through my long life in the arts, but obviously I'm not going to be able to shout them all out now. Mm-hmm. But I do want to talk about some people in my current world, and then kind of moving back kind of through graduate school, people who have been very important to me as artists and friends, and kind of co-conspirators or like community builders together. And the first is Crystal Phelps, and Crystal and I run Coworker Gallery together, which right now is kind of a roving space, but we are getting ready to curate a show at the Rife Gallery in Columbus in 2026. So it's a ways off, but
congrats though. I can't wait to see it.
We're going to build that show. So, we're kind of like on a hiatus until we get that show. But Crystal and I started Coworker in the corner of our office at our arts admin job. We had part-time arts admin jobs. We had an office together. We had a corner. Why not start a gallery? Oh, and I showed your work there.
Yes, you did. I was so thrilled. And first I want to say you are after my own heart, because like when you told me the story of Coworker, I talk about that. I talk about it with other people all the time. Like, you want to start something? Okay, what do you have? You have access to something, and what you guys did, I find so empowering for artists, just like, we're going to do it. And we gave it the space. And now you're going to, Rife, you guys, is a huge space. I don't even know how many square feet, but it's like huge. So you're starting with 2 walls in your corner, and now you're doing this, and there's going to be other things that happen. So it's taking those steps. And I think that's also how you and I did connect more, was through that show at Coworker. So thank you again for giving me that opportunity.
Oh man, I loved living with that painting. Part of it is also, then I got to, and you were saying this with your interview with Jennifer, then you get to see the paintings in person when you curate a show. So if there's ever somebody's work that you're like, oh wait, I need to get in deep with this and see the details, and like curating it in a show is a great way to do it. So that's my friend Crystal. We work together on that. And then Natalie Lanise is an artist based in Cleveland, but she was in Toledo. And we co-founded, along with Lindsay Akins, and kind of collaborated with everyone in it, a critique group that we called Agency. And we met once a month to talk about each other's work, or we would have readings that we would discuss together. This was pre-pandemic. But that was just a really great way to come together with other women artists in Toledo. And Natalie's just an amazing artist. She works tiny scale and then huge murals too. So her work is really amazing, and just kind of building that community with her felt very important for the Toledo art scene, and also just kind of fulfilling for me to be able to start something like that with her. And then moving back to my time in Lincoln, I mentioned Nancy Friedemann Sanchez and her partner, Charlie Friedemann, and they are some of the most generous artists I've ever met, sharing knowledge and kindness. And they have a gallery space called Fiendish Plots in Lincoln. And really, watching them with that gallery space was something that I wanted to learn from and kind of take with me, even doing something as kind of small scale as co-worker, the generosity that they had with that. And also in my time in Lincoln, Angeles Cosio, who makes work that's a little more meditative and quiet, but kind of moving through processes and photography and rephotography and drawing and spilling, and really beautiful, subtle work. But Angeles and I had these long walks where we would just talk about our artistic practice and share studio visits, but we were also both teaching at the University of Nebraska and kind of bonding over teaching experiences and learning how to teach. That's something that's super important when you're first starting out, that you have people that you can kind of talk through that experience with. And along with that, Dana Fritz and Margaret Bowles were also at the University of Nebraska Lincoln, and they were older than me, so they were kind of mentors to me in the academic setting. And I'll tell you also, I'm just going to keep talking. I'm sorry, Erica.
No, please,
in the academic
please.
setting,
This is what I want.
there are so few artist mothers. And these people that I'm talking about, Dana and Margaret and Angeles, were not mothers, but welcomed me. I had not had children yet, but I wanted to. And then I was pregnant at the end of my time there. Were so supportive. And it was just so helpful to see women in academia. And then, I don't know, I wish there were more artist mothers in academia, I guess, is what I want to say about that. But it's important to find mentors there. So that was kind of the Lincoln section. And before that was my time in New York. And I'd love to shout out two artists that I went to grad school with. Jack LaHave, who is a curator and an artist and just kind of a real go-getter and artist parent. He's really an advocate for artist parents as well. And then Maya Cruz Palaleo, and Maya and I have been good, deep friends since that time in graduate school together. And their work is just a very dense layering physically on the paintings, but also of like history and place-based identity and culture, and just very, very rich work. So I think that's my list of shout outs, but there could be so many more. It was really, even this morning, I was like, I need to also name these people. That's part of being in community, right? And that is why it feels so fulfilling to have a life in the arts, I think, because there's just so many people that support you along the way, and you get to support them too. And it's just a big network in a positive way, of people who look out for each other and help each other grow.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Again, I think this is one of the reasons we've connected so much, Jordan, is also everything you're saying about a life in the arts in terms of connections and relationships is just blows my mind. I cherish all of them, as do you, those communities and people. So thank you so much for giving those shout outs to everyone. And everybody who's listening, you can check out their work as well. That's why I love doing the shout outs. I know it's so hard to choose, but it's a great way to continue to build all of our networks. So Jordan, before we jump off of here, is there anything else that you'd like to share with anything coming up, or let us know where we can find you online?
Oh, sure. So let's see. I mentioned the coworker show at Rife Gallery in 2026. Mark your calendars for May 2026. But also next May 2024, I will have a piece in a group show of public art along the river in Philadelphia. I made a flag for it. So that's going to be very different from my other work, but in a lot of ways it's the same. And other than that, I'm just plugging away in the studio, and I have my website, and I'm on Instagram, and those are good places to find me.
Okay. All right. And you guys, we will be linking Jordan's website, Instagram, all that good stuff. So
Yeah.
Jordan, thank you for taking the time out of your day to have this conversation with me. It's just been really empowering actually to
Yeah.
talk to you about all of the things, you know?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Erica. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, Jordan, have a good day. We'll talk to you later.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.